Rachel Smith stared nervously at her phone. Another message from social media reminded her of how her life had turned into chaos. A scandal at work, connected to a bad decision she had made at the beginning, had fallen on her, destroying the foundation of her life. The whole country was talking about her failure, and journalists were trying to find out the details of her personal life. She was tired, exhausted, and desperately looking for a way to escape it all. The silence of her apartment was broken by the ringing of her phone. A name appeared on the screen, Christian Randolph. It was a name she knew all too well. Christian was her brother's best friend, confident, a little cocky, and charismatic as hell. Rachel frowned before answering. "Hi, Chris," she said, the old one sounding cheerful. "Rachel, it's good to hear from you," he said, his voice as confident as ever. "How are you?" "Well, you've probably read the news, so you can guess," she replied with a bitter smile. Christian paused, as if he were considering something important. "I have a proposition," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "What proposition?" Rachel tensed, not understanding where he was going with this. "I'm going home for Christmas, to my family's island restaurant. You know how my sisters love to set me up with anyone. I thought maybe we could help each other out." Rachel paused. "Help? How?" "You pretend to be my girlfriend for the holidays," Christian said, making this the most ordinary request. "And I guarantee that no journalist will get to you on our island. You'll get a break from all this madness." Rachel almost laughed. It sounded like some kind of wild adventure. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Absolutely," he replied calmly. "You get a break from the press, I get to draw from the sidebar to build me a life. A win-win deal." Her fingers ran nervously along the edge of the table. On one hand, the idea seemed crazy. On the other, the prospect of a few days away from the world was tempting. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Just playing the role of my girlfriend." A few fake smiles. "Hold my hand," Christian chuckled. "No big deal." Rachel felt it, feeling the battle between reason and despair inside her. "Okay," she said finally. "But only for the holidays." "Okay," he answered so easily that she wondered what he hadn't said. After hanging up, Rachel suddenly felt a strange thrill. It was an act, a pretense. But somehow she already knew that this trip would change everything. The plane slowly descended over the snowy expanses of Canada, and Rachel couldn't take her eyes off the view outside the window. The snow-white forests, frozen lakes, and sparkling mountains looked like they came straight out of a postcard. Below them lay the Randolphs' private island, the place where Rachel would be spending a few days as a guest. Christian, sitting next to them, noticed her admiration. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he asked with a small smile. "Very," she answered quietly, feeling her heart skip a beat with excitement. When they landed, they were met by a black SUV with a driver who quickly drove them to a huge house, larger than a castle. The building's facade, decorated with Christmas lights, glowed in the twilight, and distant fir trees surrounded the hill. "Welcome to Randolph Hall," Christian said, helping Rachel out of the car. They were already waiting on the porch. Christian's father, Mr. Randolph, was the first to approach him. He was a tall man with gray hair and a stern look. His mother stood behind him, a fiery woman with a kind smile. And next to him were Christian's two sisters, the eldest, Victoria, with a cold gaze and perfect posture, and the youngest, Lily, who was glowing with enthusiasm. "Christian, finally!" Lily exclaimed, throwing blows at his neck. Then she turned back to Rachel and smiled welcomingly. "And you must be Rachel?" "Yes," she answered, trying to act confident. "We're so glad you're here," Christian's mother said, coming closer. "Christian rarely brings anyone home, so this is a big deal for us." Rachel felt her face flush. "Well, thank you," she mumbled, not accidentally finding something to say. But Victoria, standing a little to the side, narrowed her eyes. "I hope you like it here," she said coldly. "Although the island can be a little secluded." Christian shot his sister a warning look, but said nothing. He took Rachel's hand and squeezed her fingers lightly. "We should come in," he suggested. The house was even more impressive inside. High ceilings festooned with fir trees, a huge Christmas tree twinkling with lights, and a fireplace with a cozy fire crackling in the room. "You'll like it here," Christian said quietly as they walked upstairs. "I asked for the room next to mine to be prepared for you." Rachel felt her heart beat faster. "I hope everything goes smoothly," she whispered. "Everything will be fine," he assured her. Later, at dinner, Rachel felt like she was taking a test. Christiana's entire family was asking her questions about her job, her hobbies, her family. She tried to sound confident, but she felt more and more tense with each passing minute. "So you're a marketer?" Christian's father asked, looking at her carefully. "Yeah, I worked for a big company until I decided to take a little break," she answered cautiously. "A break?" Victoria asked, raising an eyebrow. An interesting choice for someone that age. Rachel felt Christian squeeze her hand under the table. "Victoria, I don't think now is the time to interrogate you," he said calmly. Victoria shrugged, but said nothing more. After dinner, Lily took Rachel to her room, which had a stunning view of the frozen lake. "You were great at the table," Lily said with a wink. "Thank you." "It was a little tense," Rachel admitted. "Don't worry. Christian rarely brings anyone, so everyone is just a little curious," Lily reassured her. After Lily left, Rachel sat on her bed, feeling both relieved and depressed. But what bothered her most was how often she thought about Christian. This man she barely knew had suddenly become her only ally. Maybe playing the role of the fake girlfriend would be harder than she thought. The following days on the island were filled with family traditions that amazed her with their luxury and comfort. Rachel gradually got used to the Christian's Girl video. She played it convincingly, she smiled, held his hand, laughed at his jokes. But sometimes she caught herself thinking that all these gestures ceased to be pretense. Christmas was just around the corner, and the atmosphere in Randolph's house was festive. Victoria was in charge of decorating the tree, Christian's mother was busy preparing traditional dishes, and Lily was involving Rachel in all the details, from decorating gingerbread houses to choosing outfits for the Yule Ball. One evening, as the sun began to set, Rachel decided to take a walk along the frozen lake. She wanted to be alone for a while, to sort out her feelings. Dressed in a warm coat and a wool scarf, she walked out of the house, enjoying the crunch of the snow under her feet. "You weren't planning on designing it alone, were you?" a familiar voice said behind her. Rachel turned around to see Christian standing a few feet away, his hands in his coat pockets and a small smile on his face. "No," she said with a light laugh. "I just wanted to get some fresh air." "Then let me keep you company," he said, coming closer. They walked silently along the lake, a light breeze ruffling her hair, the snow beneath their feet sparkling in the moonlight. Christian was the first to break the silence. "I noticed how you were holding up. You did much better than I expected." "Did you expect me to fail?" she said, smiling. "No," he answered seriously. "I just know how my family can be tense. Especially Victoria." "Victoria isn't as scary as she seems," Rachel said. "Although I do worry a little about her watching me so closely." Christian smiled. "She's always been like that. Victoria is so controlling, and it's hard for her to trust people." Rachel froze and looked at him. "And you? Do you trust me?" Christian thought for a moment before answering. "I think so. You're here despite all this. That says a lot." Rachel felt a warmth in her chest. Those words meant more to her than she expected. They reached the wooden gazebos, the main feature of the landscape at the edge of the lake. Christian and Rachel sat on a bench and looked at the stars shining brightly in the night sky. "You know," Christian began, breaking the silence. "Sometimes I feel like this is all a game. The way we support our friends, our family community." Rachel looked at him, surprised. "Do you feel the pressure, too?" "Oh, yeah. Everyone expects me to stay here, take over the family business, find the right wife. But that's not what I want. What do you want? She asked, not looking away. Christian smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. I'd like to know. The phrase struck a chord in Rachel. She felt like she was looking at a man who was hiding his true self behind a mask of confidence. Maybe you should try being honest with yourself, she suggested carefully. Christian looked at her, and his eyes warmed. You're the first person to tell me that. Rachel felt an invisible connection between them. They were both searching for themselves, and maybe that was what connected them. When they got back to the house, the snow started to fall in large flakes, covering everything with a soft white blanket. Christian helped Rachel take off her coat, their hands accidentally touched. It was a moment, but it made them both freeze. Good night, Christian said quietly, before going to his room. Rachel stood in the hallway, feeling her heart beat faster. She couldn't deny that her feelings for Christian had become more than just a game. The morning on the island was especially beautiful. The sun was breaking through the thick pine trees, the snow sparkled like millions of diamonds. Rachel went down to breakfast, feeling a little strange after the conversation with Christian last night. She thinks she's convincing herself that it was just a game, but something inside tells her that it's not true anymore. In the dining room, she was greeted by a cozy cup of freshly brewed coffee and freshly baked buns. The large Randolph family was gathered around a long table, their animated conversation filling the room. Rachel, come sit with us. Lily waved her hand, indicating the seat next to Christian. Rachel sat next to Christian. He looked like he had slept peacefully all night, while her head was full of fluid. How did you sleep? He asked, leaning closer so that she could hear him over the voices. Good, thank you, she replied with a small smile. Very good, he replied, and something flickered in his eyes, causing her cheeks to turn pink. After breakfast, Lily suggested that the group go ice skating on the frozen lake. The suggestion was met with enthusiasm, and soon everyone was standing on the shore, putting on their skates. Rachel had never been very good at skating, but she tried not to show it. However, her first attempt at taking a step ended with her slipping and almost falling. Careful, Christian said, and a moment later his strong arms were supporting her near her waist. She looked up and met his gaze. Their faces were so close that she could feel his warm breath. I think I should stay off the ice, she muttered, looking away sheepishly. Or just hold on to me, he suggested with a smile. He ran his hand along the ice, helping her keep her balance. Rachel felt the warmth of his palm penetrate her gloves, and it made her heart beat faster. Are you always this confident? She asked, trying to distract herself from her thoughts. No, he answered, surprisingly honest. But I try to appear that way. Why? She looked at him, surprised. Christian thought for a moment before answering. That people expect it. When you, Randolph, you can't be weak. Rachel felt her heart clench. She saw in him a man who, despite his outward appearance, carried within him the weight of expectations. A little weakness is not a bad thing, she said quietly. Christian looked at her as if her words had cut deeper than he had expected. Later, when everyone had returned to the house and were busy with their own affairs, Rachel was alone in the living room. She sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a warm blanket, looking into the fire. May I join you? Christian's voice came. She turned and sighed. Of course. He sat down next to her, giving her a quick glance. You've settled in really quickly, he said. I'm not sure everyone thinks that, she replied, remembering Victoria's cold gaze. Christian chuckled. Victoria is like that with everyone. She just needs more time. They fell silent, looking at the flames. To realize that the world around them had stopped, and it was just the two of them. You know, I didn't expect to feel so comfortable with you, he said quietly. Rachel turned to him, her eyes widening in surprise. What are you talking about? That it's all an act, a pretense. But sometimes I forget it's not. Rachel felt her heart skip a beat. Christian. Don't say anything, he interrupted, leaning closer. Just tell me if I'm wrong. His face was so close that she could see every detail, the glint in his eyes, the slight shadow of his stubble. She wanted to say something, but the words caught in her throat. And then he kissed her. It was a soft, warm kiss, as if it were the only one at that moment. Rachel froze for a second, but then her hands moved toward him of their own accord. When they broke apart, she looked into his eyes, feeling her face heat up. This will definitely make our game more difficult, she whispered. Maybe, he answered with a smile. But maybe it won't be a game anymore? Rachel knew that this moment had changed everything. She couldn't deny her feelings any longer, and she was left wondering if she was ready to risk her heart for Christian. Christmas Eve had arrived, and the Randolph household was in a festive mood. A huge Christmas tree, decorated with twinkling lights and road decorations, took center stage in the living room. All the guests were dressed from head to toe in luxurious outfits, and the aroma of traditional food wafted from the kitchen. Rachel felt a little out of place. It had been 2 days since her kiss with Christian, and they had avoided talking about it all this time. She still couldn't figure out her feelings. "You look great," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned around to see Christian. His dark suit fit him perfectly, emphasizing his handsomeness and natural charm. "Thank you," she replied shyly. "You too." Christian came closer and lowered his voice so that no one could hear their conversation. "We need to talk, Rachel." "About what?" She tried to appear indifferent, but her heart was beating faster. "You know what?" His voice was quiet but insistent. Before she could answer, Victoria came up to him. "Christian, your mother is waiting for you in the office," she said coldly, casting a careful glance at Rachel. He turned and looked at Rachel. "We'll talk later, I promise." She turned around, feeling slightly disappointed. Rachel had been aware of Victoria's and the other guests' glances all evening. She knew that their game was under close scrutiny. After dinner, everyone settled in the living room, where they began to say congratulations. When it was Christian's turn, he walked up to the tree and took out a small package. Instead of handing it to someone else in the family, he went straight to Rachel. "This is for you," he said, handing her the gift. The room was quiet, all eyes were on them. Rachel carefully untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a snowflake pendant encrusted with diamonds. "Christian, this is too much," she whispered, looking at him. "Not much," he answered firmly. "Because you mean so much to me." Rachel felt her heart clench. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what. "Can we leave now?" Christian asked the group, taking Rachel's hand. He led her out into the garden, where the snow-covered trees glowed softly under the garland. "I can't pretend anymore," he said, looking into her eyes. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know one thing, I want you here." Rachel froze, stunned by his words. "Christian, this is so unexpected. I don't even know how to answer." "Then tell me how you feel." He took a step forward, and their faces were within presence distance. Rachel was deeply surprised. "I'm afraid. I'm afraid that this is just an illusion created by this show, this holiday." Christian took her hands gently. "What if it is? If we really feel what we feel?" She looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and hope in them. "Then I want to try," she whispered, and Christian immediately pulled her to him, kissing her. After the holidays, Rachel decided to stay on the island for a few days. During this time, she and Christian performed together, enjoying every moment. When it was time to leave, Christian stood with her on the pier, holding her hand. "I don't want this to end," he said. "And it won't end," she answered. "We will find a way out." He smiled and hugged her tightly. Christmas gave them more than they could have expected. It was not just a holiday, but the beginning of a new story, full of love, hopes, and dreams of a player.